and I'll stay on the line though for a half hour past that. If people want to stay and ask questions and do Q&A, we'll stay around for another 30 minutes, but we'll end at the top of the hour. Also want to remind you that questions are welcome throughout the webinar. It's great if you have a question or concern or comment to go ahead and raise those. You can just type in the chat feature and send us your question and I'll read it, or one of us will, and we'll respond to it and have some dialogue of the sort in that regard. Also, just to let you know that I'm going to cover quite a bit of material today. That's a variety of graphs and figures. And so I've also written a white paper that covers the same material. It has the same graphs and figures, so that that'll be available in a couple of weeks. We'll let you know when it's up on the website so that you could come and download that if you would like. So we'll go ahead and begin. I hope that all of you recognize this distinguished American. He's one of the great inventors of all time, and he's credited with hundreds and hundreds of patents. This is a picture of Thomas Edison in his lab at Menlo Park, New Jersey. And he's actually holding in his hand one of his most significant inventions or scientific discoveries. And we'll give you a close-up of it so that you can see the light bulb that Thomas Edison first invented. This is looks quite a bit like light bulbs we have today, actually, for as old as it was. It took him a long time to get here. Estimates are that he ran over 3,000 different experiments before he could find the right filament that would do the job that he wanted done, was to have a bright enough vision as well as letting it go long enough that it wouldn't just burn out in a few minutes or even a few short hours. So in a scientific sense, you would say that the independent variable here in his experiments was the intensity of the light and the length of the light. And the dependent variable was to get the right filament inside that bulb that would push that independent variable longer and longer. So he hit on the idea that carbon, which is based on plant or animal compounds, may be the right way to go. He ordered plants from all over the world to try to convert them to carbon to use. But after 3,000 tries, got the one that would work, and now we use tungsten wire and other kinds of wires in these things. But it's a good example of the kind of persistence that a scientist like Edison has to follow in the series of experiments that they use to discover important things like this or invent new technologies. We're going to come back to Edison as we go throughout this presentation, so I want you to keep him in mind. Today we're going to talk about three things: direct assessment of student achievement, which is kind of the holy grail in terms of what we've been trying to do in higher education, to be able to assess student learning and use that information to improve curricula or improve courses so that we can see gains in student learning. Indirect assessment will be another topic we'll cover. Besides just getting student outcomes and achievement of outcomes, there are other factors that are important to determine academic quality, so it's nice to be able to look at some other things. And then the better part of the presentation will be about how we apply assessment processes and techniques to academic support operations to also lead to their continuous improvement. This would be departments like financial aid, the library, bookstore, registrar's office, and so forth. So let's jump into the direct assessment piece. You know, we've been working for 20 years in higher education to be able to measure student learning and then use that to see improvements. 20 years ago, in 1992, 9 distinguished researchers, Peter Ewell, Trudy Banta, Pat Hutchings, people like this, wrote a paper that was called The Principles of Good Practice for Assessing Student Learning. It was published by AAHE, which is no longer in operation. Just this past year, the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment published a newsletter And they asked some of these authors that wrote this paper 20 years ago to reflect back and talk to us about progress that we've made or gains in that amount of time. And so this is a quote from the newsletter that was published by the National Institute just a few months ago. And these authors went back and reflected and looked at the state of assessment today. And if you've had time to read this quote while I've been talking, you get to the point that the problem is we still are not able to document real improvements. We haven't been able to show that students are learning more after millions of hours of very smart people working on this particular issue. And in fact, the National Institute, which is a great resource for those of you working in assessment, also published a companion piece where they took nominations for exemplary institutions with exemplary assessment plans and featured 9 of those in a publication that is available on their website. And I read through all 9 of these case studies, and as I read them, these are supposed to be the best of the best. Only 2 of them are really doing direct assessment of student learning, and even those 2 haven't been able to do kind of a retest to see if there's any gain or progress being made. So it kind of documents further this sort of sad state of affairs with assessment. Why is this? Why, after all this time and energy and work, aren't we able to really document student learning and show improvement? I think because we're asking the wrong questions. We keep asking the question about program outcomes, and we try to assess student achievement of program outcomes. And I'll show you some examples of these as you look at the screen. Excuse me, we'll skip over that slide, and I'll refer to it in a minute. But here's a set of outcomes that I've pulled from a typical university here in the United States. This is a business administration degree, a bachelor's degree. It's from a real university. This could be your university. It looks, these all look pretty similar. But typical program has maybe 6 to 10 outcomes that have been written. They're pretty broad general concepts like the ones that you see here. There's another page of them. There's 6 altogether in this particular program. We've done a good job focusing on program outcomes, and people have developed capstone courses where they try to wrap all the learning together and assess it. They've developed portfolios. We have a number of examinations, like in business, you have a major field test from ACT that could be used. People do these major projects. But at the end of the day, if you're assessing one of these 6 outcomes and you think that you want to make improvements or you're not achieving at the level that you would like, where do you go? What do you do? Which course do you change? What curriculum developments do you make to improve learning or improve student achievement of one of these program outcomes? The problem is that these outcomes are covered in many courses. There could be half a dozen courses in a business degree that deal with one of these particular outcomes. So it's very difficult to know if you change something in this course, will it have an impact on student learning that showed up in the program outcomes here. Furthermore, students don't take the same courses. I mean, in a typical degree, you have 40 courses, and some of those are gen ed, some of those are in the major. In the major, you have elective courses as well as required courses. You have general electives altogether, so different students are taking different combinations of courses, and you're not sure what really contributes to learning or achievement of these particular outcomes. So I think we're looking at the wrong unit of measure. We need to drop down and look at the courses, because if you looked at course outcomes, you would be able to see what particular learning activities or materials or instructional activities were contributing to that learning. And if you're not getting the results that you would like on that particular course outcome, you know what to change. Go back into the course, you look at those lessons or modules or units or activities that dealt with that particular outcome, and you can make a difference. You can change those, and then you can see the results change. So I think if we drop down to the course as the unit of analysis or measurement, we'll have a lot more success if we can actually document achievement and changes in achievement. And you can always get back to program outcomes, because if you map those course outcomes back to these program outcomes, then you score all the course outcomes, you can get a kind of an average or a roll-up to what the program outcome is anyway. So if we go to course outcomes, which I think makes a lot of sense, there's a problem with that as well, though, and it's typified by this next slide. We've all just had a chance to look at the Olympics, I think, completed recently. So you might have seen scores like this where the different judges rate competitions. In some competitions like diving and gymnastics, or if you're a fan of Dancing with the Stars, you see the judges that do a rating. Well, these judges are supposed to be experts. They're experienced in this field, and they're trained on the rubric. There's the definition of what a 10 means versus a 9 or an 8. You know what the outcomes are because there's certain required moves that people have to make or elements in a routine or diet or whatever. So they've got clear outcomes and they've got clear rubrics, and if they do it well, they'll get consistency. You shouldn't get a spread like this where you see everything from an 8.5 to a 6.0. Imagine in the Olympics if we let every judge write their own rubric. If we said you can decide what you think is important in a routine. Or what if we even let the judges decide their own outcomes? I think the routine should include this exercise, or somebody else thinks it should include a different move. And they're all acting independently with different rubrics and different outcomes. You can imagine the chaos. It wouldn't just be a complaint about one or two Eastern European judges that are trying to rig the deck, so to speak. Well, it sounds kind of trite and silly maybe to think about that at the Olympics. But when you think about it, that's exactly what we do in our universities and colleges. We let every faculty member decide what the outcomes are going to be, what the rubrics are going to be to assess those. And they all apply them in their own unique or individual way. When I was a dean of faculty at a traditional university on the ground, we had a course in freshman English, one of the most frequently offered courses at the university. We typically had 4 or 5 different faculty members teaching that course, and guess what? They used different textbooks, they used different outcomes, they had different ways to assess those outcomes, and it's an example of the kind of chaos you get when there's not consistency. So one of the things that we need to do if we want to get serious about assessment is start to standardize some elements of the curriculum. We don't all have to teach it the same way or do the same things, but it would be important to agree on what the outcomes of the course would be and how we're going to assess or measure success against those outcomes. We do have some examples of that in higher education. The nursing programs and the teacher education programs, because they have programmatic accreditors that specify what needs to be covered pretty tightly in those courses, and because there are state licensing boards in those fields too, they tend to get a very standard curriculum. It's taught the same way over and over again, and they work as a team or as a unit on developing those courses. So there are examples where we can agree to do this, and I'm going to run through now just a quick kind of illustration of how if you design a course using backward design process, you can get to this point where you have clear outcomes and clear assessment of those. And this is something we covered in an earlier webinar on curriculum development. If you want to see more detail about this, you can go to the website and pull that one down. But in this process, it's pretty simple. You have a vision of where this course is going. Where does it fit in the overall curriculum? If you're the course designer or the faculty member creating it, the next key thing is to get outcomes and decide what those appropriate outcomes are. You recall that earlier slide where I said there's 40 courses in an undergraduate degree. There's 120 credits, and a typical course has 5 or 6 outcomes to it, so you have maybe 250 outcomes. When you think about it, that's all the outcomes you have to cover everything that it takes to be an educated college degree person. It covers all the Gen Ed outcomes and all the things that you're going to learn in the major, and maybe a concentration or a minor But 250 outcomes is about what we have to spend. That's our currency to really define an entire degree at the baccalaureate level. So the point is, get the right outcomes. Have to be careful and not waste those, and to work hard as a unit or as a profession to know what those outcomes ought to be, and then put those in the set of courses. Well, after you get the outcomes, the next thing you do is write the assessments and decide what evidence will I accept that people have actually met that outcome, and what assignment will I give, what exam questions will I ask, or what's the appropriate way to assess it. And then after you get those things in place, you start building materials, and you look for learning resources, pick a textbook, and things like that. We'll illustrate how this plays out. If you do this well, if you get the outcomes clear and an assessment for each one of those outcomes, then you can actually start tracking student performance. So this is an example of a course that has the outcomes down the left-hand side. Various graded assignments are typical of an online course like quizzes or discussion forums, and then the number of points that's available. The next step in the process is to link those outcomes to the particular assignment or assessment that goes with them, so that we illustrate that with these arrows. And if you do this, when you design the course that's set up and ready to go, you can extract data from your learning management system that reports the score for each of the course outcomes. So here's an example of what that report might look like. Same course, 4 outcomes. This accumulates data over 3 terms when this course was taught. And it's a sample or fictitious data, but you can see in this case that the students are scoring very well, universally high on outcome number 4, but they're not doing so well in outcome number 1. This course has been taught over 3 terms, so you have a large enough number of students in the sample. You can start to conclude that the course isn't working, at least for outcome number 1. This is a course that we can improve. So the faculty member, the course designer, the team of people can go look at this course and say, what are we doing to teach outcome number 1? What are instruction materials and activities and so forth? And you can change it. And when you do, in most cases, you'll see improvement. It's obvious in many cases when you do this what things could be done differently. Maybe the topic was introduced too early in the course. The students weren't ready for it. Maybe the textbook doesn't have good content over that particular outcome where it does for the other ones. So you can see things and start to hypothesize and make changes, just like Thomas Edison did when he's building his light bulb. You're trying to get to that independent variable course outcomes, and you can try different combinations of dependent variables, just like he tried different combinations of materials to get that filament to burn right. And the result is you can document where the students are, make changes, and then let students work for a while and document again if improvements are going on. Here's a diagram that we're going to build out, kind of flesh out, that shows you, it kind of illustrates this concept. So the independent variable here in a scientific experiment is those scores on those summative assessments of course outcomes. And you've got all this variety of things going on in the classroom. You've got faculty members interacting with students, students interacting with other students, a variety of instruction materials that you've either written or selected for students to use. You sequence activities in a certain format, and you may have some formative assessments in there, quizzes and other activities where students can kind of check and see how they're progressing. It's a complex mix, and together it kind of creates the base for an experiment that anybody can run to keep improving those outcomes. And if you keep those outcomes and assessments constant over time, even when you start changing these other elements of the course, you'll start to see improvement. And version after version or edition after edition of the course, you'll see better student learning occurring. That's the basic element or the basic concept for direct assessment of student achievement. If we move it down to the course level and we standardize at least a couple key elements of that course, we'll start to see improvement and we can see what works and what doesn't work. Let's move now to indirect assessment. We're going to build out this diagram. Indirect assessment can be very helpful for academic leaders and faculty as they start to assess the quality of their programs. Also, we can contribute ideas and concepts that we could use to start making changes in this basic model that you see here. So first thing I want to take a look at is alternative independent variables that are important to look at that may be correlated and also give us information about where to make changes. So the first one is student satisfaction. Almost all of you at your universities are using some kind of student survey near the end of the course, getting feedback about the faculty member, about the course itself. That satisfaction is often related or correlated with student outcomes because they tend to go together. But you may get good sources of information there, like the students may say, the questions were unclear. I didn't get good feedback from my faculty. Or the items on the quiz didn't seem to relate to what I was learning in the textbook. They'll give you clues as to things you can change back in that classroom mix to improve instruction. Another one is grades. Grades are correlated with outcomes because if students fail, they're going to, in most of their grades, they might not be able to do those outcomes very well. But the grades cover other things. They cover oftentimes participation, kind of effort levels of students. They cover formative assessments all the way to composite grades. So it's not a direct marriage with the course outcome, which is why the accrediting bodies don't want you and won't allow you to use grades as a key measure of assessment in the course. Another important one is retention. Everybody wants to know what retention rates are in their programs because it's a marker of quality. It also has a big impact on the financial success of the program. So whether it's retention within the course, who all finishes the course, or retention from term to term, it's a key variable that we oftentimes want to track and predict if we can, or make changes that improve retention. And again, retention is obviously correlated with course outcomes because if you flunk the course, you're going to drop out and not continue on the program of study. A couple other ones that actually happen after graduation that some institutions track. Some new studies are coming out where institutions track their alumni and the salary increases that they get as a result of their degree or promotions that they receive. Those are indirect indicators of the quality of the program, similar to placement rates. Placement rate, if it's good and it's strong over time, indicates that those graduates are highly valued. If companies hire them, want to come back and hire more. So again, it's an indicator of academic quality in kind of an indirect way, but it's good to track it and it gives you some information about the overall success of your program. So there are different kinds of independent variables that we can test for and track as well. But in addition, there are things that we need to look at, I think, before the class even starts. So there's a whole set of variables we may pay attention to that are pre-course or pre-admission. We obviously check academic skills, reading, writing, and math, typically. In the online environment, we're using tests, commercial tests like the Wonderlic or Compass or AccuPlacer. And in traditional universities, we're using SAT and ACT as some kind of measure of academic skills and academic readiness. There's a whole debate about remedial courses, developmental courses, and where they fit and how to use those. Obviously, it's up to the institution to determine what's the best way to assess those skills, and then the standards that you put in place before you allow students to go take regular classes. But it's important information, and it makes a big difference in student success, obviously. Another one that many institutions look at are readiness attributes. This encompasses a wide range of abilities of the student. Because online students work independently, people want to understand if they're an independent thinker, if they're a procrastinator, if they're good time managers. They have to know the technical skills to operate the equipment, the computer, and so forth. So there's a variety of readiness attributes that institutions often look at and can be helpful in determining how well the student's going to perform in that classroom. If you go to Google and type in online student readiness, you'll get a whole list of institutions, universities, and samples you can go to of these kind of readiness surveys. There are typically 20 questions covering things like procrastination and computer skills. And they'll give you a score at the end and tell you whether or not you're ready to do an online class, and maybe sometimes some help on other activities. One of the best examples I've seen is a commercial product from a company called Smarter Measures. They've got a pretty sophisticated student readiness assessment that's available, and a number of institutions use this. You can see all the different factors that they test here. They even test typing speed by when a student uses a keyboard. They have a reading rate and recall test. It's a pretty sophisticated, comprehensive way to assess student readiness, and they've taken the time and the effort to run validation studies that predict student success in college based on these variables. So that's one that may take a look at or think about. Two other factors that are important for kind of pre-admission or before students get to class are demographics. It's good to know about. This is one of the easiest ones to get or to gather. But older women do better in an online class. So you want to know that if you have a class full of older females, they're going to score higher than a class of younger males. So if you're going to try to study what are those variables that impact student success or student achievement, you need to control for variance like that and be able to control or partial out variance that comes just because of the student demographics. One other thing that's important that many institutions pay attention to and could figure into the mix here is faculty characteristics. I've run several studies myself comparing full-time faculty to part-time faculty, and it doesn't make any difference. You may want to see if people with PhDs have more success than people with master's degrees. I think the one thing it does show is kind of teaching style of faculty members. I've seen good correlation between the tone and the style of a faculty member and the way they interact with students in a classroom. It does make a difference in student achievement. So there's a variable there that we can look at that would help us know what to do in the classroom or how to train faculty for the right kind of behaviors in the classroom if we need to increase student assessment. We have two more potential sources of information, the alumni survey and the employer survey. So these are both, again, post-graduation, but they can be good sources of information about the quality of a program and give you ideas on how to improve your classes in the program. Alumni surveys are typically done 3 to 5 years after graduation, and student still knows a little bit about remembers what happened in their academic program and what they were taught. But now they're in the job and they know what they have to do and what's working for them, the kind of skills that they apply and need in the classroom. So it can be good source of data on topics in the curriculum and skills to be taught. Same thing with employers, it's more difficult to get, but good employer feedback tells you what they like about your student, the graduate from your program, and can give you good sources of information. So there's the complete picture as I see it, a model for curriculum development. Now this seems kind of daunting, doesn't it? You ask yourself, do I have to measure all these things and track all this to see if we have a really good academic program and assess the quality? Well, the key, again, is to assess student achievement. These other factors relate to it in many ways. You can contribute to our understanding. The good news is that we've got ways to assess all of these. There are institutions right now that are gathering this data from their students and their classes. And some of them are more sophisticated than others, and some of them are still pretty rudimentary, but the instruments are there. The data can be collected. And the really good news is that we all have enough computing power now that it's leveled the playing field. And we have computers on our desks that are able to collect all this data and store it, and then also to run the analyses, to run multivariate analyses that control for all the different variances going on here and tell us what's working. So with a model like this, you don't have to start with all of this. Every one of us does bits and pieces of this. You may continue to add to your overall assessment program so that you see what's working and what's not. But now, for I think the first time in the history, my understanding of the history of higher ed, if you put a system like this in place where you've got those outcomes and those assessments clearly defined, try different materials. You can try different sequences of activities in the classroom. You can compare inductive versus deductive methods. You can compare a variety of activities and different kinds of behaviors in the classroom to see what works and what gets better results. And you can even start looking at different kinds of students matching up with different materials and get pretty sophisticated about this. But the model's there, the data's there, the computer power is there. We can start to really see what works and understand how to improve student achievement. We're going to move now to assessing and using good assessment data to drive similar improvement in academic support services. Measurements are good things. There's all kinds of things that we measure in our everyday life. We have a little exercise going on here at the Learning House, trying to get people to exercise. So everybody's wearing pedometers so we can see how many steps we take every day. We're supposed to get 10,000 steps a day, so we're tracking and measuring our success to get better health. You may be saving money for a new car, and you look at your bank account every month, and that's a good measure of how close you're getting to that goal that you have. We even use measurements to say how well we're doing. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'm kind of at 7 today because it's moving outside or whatever. In the world of leadership and management, we're leading and developing these support services. Measurements like this can be very helpful to help us see what's going on, how we're doing, and to track progress and to stimulate progress. We call them metrics instead of measurements, but it's the same concept. Metrics usually fall into 4 quadrants: quantity, quality, time, and finance or money. And it's every department, every organization can develop metrics in all 4 of those quadrants that help them track what they're doing and see their progress over time. And if they make alterations or changes, document whether or not it worked. A similar concept to assessing student learning. I'm going to show you 2 sample sets of metrics. The first one is for an overall university online program in general. And we take the metrics here in these 4 quadrants and put them in what's often referred to as a dashboard. Dashboard, like a dashboard on your car, shows a couple of gauges, and it lets you see how your program or how your department or how your operation is running. In this case, I selected data that I think is important to judge the overall quality of an online program. So if you're an administrator that's managing that, you can pay attention to this kind of data and help you know how your program is doing. So in the quantity area, for example, you want to look at things like the number of sections that are being taught, which is some idea of the workload of faculty, and number of credit hours being generated. There are a number of metrics to choose in any of these quadrants, and it's important for the leader and the staff to work together to identify the ones that are most important for your situation, given your institution, your goals, and what you're trying to accomplish with your program. In this case, if you look at the quantity data, it's showing that this is a growing program, that we're increasing the number of sections, number of student credit hours year over year, and we're comparing the same point in time each year because we want to kind of adjust for seasonal differences. If you move over to quality, then quality can look at student satisfaction, student performance. It can also be measured by the supervisor judging the accuracy or the correctness of operations. In this case, we're using student satisfaction, the average student satisfaction score in the term of surveys for each course, and you see that it's going from 4.5, 4.4, 4.3, maybe a slight decrease going on there. And then if you look at graduation rates, which is a key indicator of quality as well as financial health, again, you see a little bit of a slight decline. So you may come to the conclusion that our quality is slipping a little bit on these 2 measures, and think about if you want to try to intervene or do something based on that. In this case, the time metric I selected was number of terms to graduation, divided by 4 divisions or 4 programs in the operation. And you can see that there doesn't seem to be a consistent pattern. That some of them are going up a little bit, some down a little bit, but they're pretty consistent in terms of overall time to graduation. So you look at the finance quadrant then. Again, these are some key numbers that are typically used to track the financial performance, financial health of an online program. You want to see the student's perception or the class size is going up, which is good financially because then it's less expense per student to offer that class. Credits per student is also going up. Students are taking a few more classes on average, so they're moving through the program faster. And then the cost per credit. So what did it cost us to deliver these credit hours? You take the total cost of the program, divide it by the credit hours generated, and in this case, the cost to deliver those credits is going down. So financially, this program is improving over time. It's getting bigger, and a lot of your key metrics are showing that it's more efficient. So there's less expense and more money going to the bottom line, so to speak. But you get this issue about quality, maybe quality slipping. Maybe we raise the ratio of academic advisors or support staff to students, and so students aren't getting a good response time, and they're having more trouble getting help with questions or problems they have. Or maybe the increase in class size is leading to some issues about student satisfaction. So you want to start looking at the correlation between these four sets of metrics. And as one goes up, another one might go down because they're all related. This becomes a tool for the leader and the staff in that operation to look at it, to track what's happening, to see trends and see interrelationships between these metrics, and then make decisions about programs they want to implement or policies they want to change. If you make a policy change and then you see the results going in the direction that you want, that's great. But it helps you see and track that. Let's look now at an example more tightly at a university library. The same kind of concepts apply to a library. You've got quantity, quality, time, and finance. You can do metrics like this and dashboards at every level. The library may be divided into 3 departments: reference, systems librarians to run the IT supply, and maybe for services, and maybe trainers to do workshops and so forth. So each of those separate departments could have its own dashboard like this, where they pick the appropriate metrics and track them to see how their performance is moving over time. So let's look a little bit at the library and kind of break this apart. Under quantity, you want to track how many database searches are going on. This library offers workshops for its online students, so it's important to see how many people show up. The reference desk handles email inquiries and phone inquiries, so you're tracking both of those. So 4 basic quantity metrics are going on here. It shows the volume of work in this particular library. If you look at these trends, you'll see that this library is providing more service. More students are doing searches, they're coming to workshops, and they're calling the reference desk. Now, think about this. If the enrollment in the program is going up, that would be expected and natural. If the enrollment is staying the same while this level of service is going up, it means more and more students are using the library. This may be a good thing. Maybe a campaign underway to encourage library use, and this would be evidence that it's working as long as the student body is staying the same size. The quality metrics in this case, student satisfaction. There's an annual survey administered to the students. They have that one data point a year. And in this case, the head of the reference desk is sampling different inquiries to the reference desk and checking to see if they did it accurately and gave good service to the students. They may have a little checklist that they use and sample 10% of the reference desk inquiries. So it's a measure of accuracy. And in this case, it looks like it's declining a little bit from 91, 92, down to 85% accuracy. So maybe you pause, a kind of warning light going off, the red light flashing on the dashboard that says we should pay attention to this. The time measure, in this case, is response time on the reference desk, pretty critical for this library. So what percentage of the emails and the phone calls were handled within the appropriate amount of time. So typically you have a service level agreement, or an SLA it's called, that tracks whether or not it was within like 5 minutes for an email, or a couple hours, or whatever the SLA is set at. In this case, you don't see a coherent pattern. There's no trends up or down, staying pretty constant in the upper 80s, lower 90%. But look at the finance quadrant. In this case, a couple different measures. These folks have calculated how much it costs for the reference desk to handle an email. They're dividing the number of salaries there by the number of email queries coming in and how much time they're spending on those. Same thing with phone calls. Phone calls are a lot more expensive because it takes more time for the reference libraries to handle those phone calls. Also, some of the workshops cover the same content, and it's much cheaper to provide a seat at a workshop than it is to handle a phone call about an inquiry. So this is an example where if I was a librarian, I'd sit down with my staff and we try to figure out what are the right workshops we should offer. What are the most frequent questions that are coming in on the phone? Could we offer a workshop that would decrease the call volume, satisfy the student need for information, but do it in a much cheaper fashion? And if you implemented that program, you would expect to see a decrease in the number of calls, increase in the number of workshop attendees, and then that would drop to the bottom line and be more efficient as a library. In this case, there's another financial metrics, the cost per student, where they've taken all the students at the university, the total library cost, divided that, and you get a dollar per student expense. And it's dropping steadily over the past couple of years, which indicates the library is becoming more efficient, and they're providing good service, it looks like, at less expense, which is a great thing to know about. So these are examples of how you can use metrics and dashboards to really track your performance. Very similar, we talked about with the classroom, of having outcomes and good assessments for those outcomes, and reporting tools so you can report those term after term and see how things are going. There is another tool that I want to share with you about the management side of these support operations that you can use to find out where you can make improvements. It's like opening up the course, you see, well, here's what we did to teach this particular outcome. In this case, there's things you can do to look at your operations. So it's called process mapping. And here's an example of a process map that I put together for the registrar's office. The typical function in a registrar's office is to process student requests for transcripts. Students are going to grad school, or they may be transferred to another school, and they need a copy of their transcript. So this diagrams how that may look in a typical registrar's office. In this case, on the left-hand side, you could get a request in the mail, regular U.S. mail for a transcript. You could get an email coming into the registrar's office account, or you could get a phone call. So it tracks down step by step. You map out the process from one step to the next. So if it comes in the form of mail, there's a transcript request form in that letter from the student. Somebody in the registrar's office has to scan it in to a system, and then it gets into a collection or a file that gets sent on to the bursar's office. So throughout the day, the registrar's office is processing emails, phone calls, and the regular mail, handling those, and in the case of a phone call, they have to stop and talk with the person, fill out the transcript request form over the phone, and put it in the file to go with the other. So at the end of that day, they send this batch on to the bursar's office in the gray there, and the bursar's office has to check if the account in good standing or not. If no, they send it back to the registrar's office to notify the student. They got to contact the bursar and clear out their account. If it's yes, it goes down another path, and the bursar applies the charge and then notifies the registrar. And so the next day, the registrar gets the list back, and they print the transcripts, seal them up, put them in envelopes, and put the official stamp on the back and mail them out to students. So if you're a registrar, you're looking at this, you're saying to yourself, are there ways that we can improve this particular workflow, this process? Can we be more accurate? Can we take less time? Can we make it smoother? Different things you can try to do. So typically you'd ask a team of people to work on this. Some of the staff in the bursar's office, the registrar's office, they review this and start asking, where can we make changes? It's kind of like breaking open a course and saying, how can we improve this course? So say you've had a task force that's worked on this, they've looked at different ways to simplify the process, and here's a new workflow that results from that process redesign. So in this case, they got together and said, you know, we could put a form on the website, automate that form, so if a student completes it on the website, it goes automatically to the bursar's office and bypasses the registrar's office altogether. There might have been a series of recommendations on how to encourage students to go there and do that, and then at some point the registrar might have said the only way you can submit a form for request for transcript is through the website, this automated form. In this case, then, it goes right to the bursar's office. They got to check to see if they're in good standing or not. So again, there's no reason to send it back to the registrar's office. If the account's not in good standing, they can send a form email out or form letter to the student telling them what they need to do and leave the registrar out of it altogether. If it is a yes, on the top line, notify the registrar office picks this up, prints the transcripts, mails them out to the students. And so if you track the difference here, if you assume that in that first case, it was taking 10 minutes to do a phone call and 4 or 5 minutes to handle email or a letter from a student, and you were getting 30 a day in each of those 3 categories, it would take a registrar staff member half a day, basically, to fill out the processing on all those. And then stuffing the envelopes, printing the transcripts, on the work to go with this. So I estimated half of the staff person, $20,000, to handle transcript requests under the old process. With this new process, they had to do some work with the IT department to automate that form. And once that got in place and implemented, a lot of the work in the registrar's office goes away. They still have to spend maybe an hour a day for that many transcripts, printing them off and handling them to get to the student. But they save $15,000 a year. Now, you know, a lot less time on that staff member. So you can use workflows like this and process maps to figure out what's going on in the functions, the services that one of these academic support units performs, and start to make little changes. When you involve staff members in activities like this, they can map their own processes, they can see how to do that. And they're often the best ones to do that because they know step by step what they do to take care of things like a transcript request. And you have functions like this or processes in every department. The library, the registrar's office, the bookstore, financial aid department, the writing center, everybody's got processes. They can be very big, complex ones. Like I once saw a process map like this for graduation. Can you imagine a big map and a checklist of things to get graduation completed? The one that's pretty simple, like transcript request. But the same point applies. When you look at these and map them out, it starts to jump out to people where they could make changes, where you could eliminate a step, where you could combine steps, where you could automate things. And it becomes a good exercise for the staff to be involved with because they see how it plays out. And they're often the best source of suggestions. We could do this and make this change and it would make these improvements. So you can make changes to be more efficient and save money. You can make changes to be more accurate, provide quicker turnaround time or quality for students. There's different things that you may be your goal here, but the process map is a great tool to enable you to see where you could make appropriate changes. And then with the dashboards in place, you're tracking to see if those had the desired impact. So it's a great system for improving those academic support services. So 2 different ways to look at improving operations through assessment. In the classroom itself, we can look at standardizing those courses, having clear outcomes that are assessed consistently over time, and like Thomas Edison, we can start experimenting with what's happening here. In the area of support services, you can apply metrics and dashboards and process mapping. Start with small ones and keep building over time. And what you start to see is that dialogue changes at the institution. Instead of debating and arguing over opinions, you look at data and you say, what is this data telling us? There may be debate over what changes to make, but you don't argue with the numbers. You may not like them, but they are what they are. They indicate where you're sitting, and they can show clearly if you're making changes improve. And what happens is the decisions more and more get focused on data, and data starts driving the decision-making process, and people feel empowered. I think sometimes people are fearful of assessment. They get emotionally charged, and they're afraid of assessment. Maybe because they remember sitting in a high-stakes examination in the classroom that was going to make a big influence on their future job, or maybe they remember sitting in a hospital or a doctor's office waiting to test results from something that could be a major health issue. I think oftentimes, too, managers have used assessment data inappropriately. They use it to punish people or reprimand people. The two things that are critical in these assessment systems that I've laid out here. One is that it's all formative. This is all designed to help people get better, to improve performance, and to guide and direct it in a more positive way. We can all get better. And as we see in performance improving, it's a very motivating, empowering tool. The second principle is that it's based on data. It's about facts. It's not about somebody's opinion or subjective view of you or your performance or your department. And the facts make it objective, so we get the subjectivity out of it. Well, when you implement these kinds of assessment systems a little bit at a time until they become comprehensive, you wind up with a culture of assessment. People are thinking in these terms, and they're seeing constant improvement, constant change in their operations. So that's a pretty good overview, and I've been talking a lot. We haven't had particular questions come in, so let's stop now and see if we have some comments. If you have questions or comments that you want to share about any of this, type them into the chat session or the chat room on your screen, and we'll see what people have to say. Anyone out there with questions? With some people responding, no questions for me, but we'll take a few minutes, and comments are good too. If you disagree with something I said, if you have a point to illustrate, it's nice to share examples from your experience in your university. Yeah, here's a question from Denise. What would be the bare minimum assessment metrics to start with? We are on ground floor. If we were to pick the top 3 metrics to start with, what would they be? It would help me a little bit, Denise, to know if when you're talking about an overall online program or a particular class. I think you're talking about an online program and the performance of the program. If you want to clarify, that would be helpful. Well, the quantity metrics are always the easiest, and every department or every unit of operation has several to pick from. So if you're running a program, say a criminal justice program online, you want to start with quantity. It's pretty obvious. You're concerned about how many students we have and how many sections we're going to have to run and things like that. So you want to see the student I would pick one like number of students, you know, or number of credit hours generated in each term. And then the most important one, I think, in terms of quality is retention. So you want to look at retention within the program, class by class, or from term to term is probably a better way to look at it. So you want to be able to see how many students started in this cohort and how many are still with us at any point in time, and compare that over time. So I would start with the number of credit hours generated. I'd go 2 to the retention rates in that program, and then 3, I'd look at a financial measure like what's it cost us to deliver a credit. So you wrap in the textbooks cost, the LMS cost, faculty cost, all your expenses, overhead for administrators, and divide that by the number of credits so you can see if you're getting more efficient, less efficient, you got a bottom line going on there. Those would be the 3 I would start with for a class or a program. If it's a straight academic class and you want to assess the quality of student learning, I think you need to start with there's only one way to do that. You start with the course outcomes. And I guess that there's some cases where you may say, you know, we want to do all the outcomes. So we're just going to start one major assignment in the course and see if our students are doing well on that assignment. It's kind of overall, maybe cover several outcomes. You wouldn't have to break it down outcome by outcome, although I think it's much more efficient if you do that. We're working with an institution right now that actually has done the one assignment per course because they're running a research project where they're comparing the difference in the same course taught online and on ground. So they have one assignment that's common no matter where that course is taught, and one rubric to go with that assignment. So no matter who teaches that class, whether they teach it on ground or online, they're pulling out one assignment with rubric and comparing results. So I guess that would be kind of the bare minimum, I think. Do we get a follow-up question there?
Janice wants to know what the research shows in terms of using stats to follow graduates in terms of assessment of courses.
You know, I've done some work in institutions where I've worked on alumni surveys, 3 and 5 years out, and oftentimes it's hard to tie it back to an individual class. You tie it kind of back to the program itself or major requirements in the program, but it's difficult for students to kind of remember several years later nuances about individual courses. So but that's not my area of expertise. I don't know a lot about that. You know, you could do a lit review and you might find more detailed information or library search on that particular question.
Marcia would like to know, she says sometimes faculty don't think the right things are being measured for retention. Is that a lack of communication on both parts from the administration of what is included and from faculty as to what other criteria they think is important?
Marcia, I'm not sure I understand your question entirely. I mean, retention is retention. So there's obviously different ways to measure retention, and there's a lot of debate actually about when you start counting the students and enrolled students and so forth. But it's pretty straightforward that each institution decides what their definition of retention is. They may start at the very first term a student enrolls and then just track them each term thereafter. At some institutions I know wait until the second or the third term. They don't count a student as being there until they've kind of gone through that preliminary phase. Some institutions have different ways that they account for students that drop out for a time or stop out and then re-enter. So once you work through those kind of formulaic issues, there shouldn't be much disagreement within the institution about how you measure retention once you decide kind of yay or nay on some of those particular questions. I think what you may be really getting at here, and feel free to clarify by typing it again, is what are the factors that cause retention? And that's a big, big debate. And I've spent my life for 10 years, the last 2 universities I worked, every day trying to figure out the answer to that question, how can you improve retention? And you know, the most obvious one is raise admission standards. I mean, faculty are generally in favor of raising admission standards to get better students, and if you get better students, you're going to have better retention. But I spent a lot of time in open access institutions where the whole mission was about providing access, so there were very low admission standards to get in. You had to perform well once you got there. But you know, some of the assessment kind of diagram that I laid out there will help you get at retention. Is it older students? Is it younger students? Is it preparation of the student? Is it learning styles? A lot of that data, you can see correlations if you gather it to retention. I still feel, in my experience, that the most important contributing factor to retention is what happens in the classroom. What's the quality of the course, and more importantly than the course itself, is the quality of interaction with the faculty member. The faculty member is the #1 determiner of retention. Even though there's all kinds of life issues that come in here. People get sick, they get married, they have kids, they get moved, all kinds of things impact retention. But the #1 thing that we can control is the quality of that experience. That's why I believe that this whole discussion about assessment is very important. It's not about the accrediting bodies, it's about how to get better at what we do and how to improve that